Here are the timestamps for the video. Here are some of the distros I recommend. You got Bazite, Linux Mint, Fedora, and Leap. Well, not OpenSUSE Leap, it's a Tumbleweed. But it shouldn't be too hard to get them set up and running. I'm not gonna go through the features of these distros one by one, but in this example we're gonna be using Bazite since it has a pretty broad support for most hardware, and it has a it's not immutable, but has an immutable file system, which should make it more resilient to changes, so you can't accidentally delete critical system components. And not to mention, it gives you a feature to roll back the entire system to a previous state if it got messed up. If we look here, download Bazite, look at the downloads, and you can select your hardware in case you have a weird hardware configuration. Now, what I highly recommend you do before you install any Linux distribution to your hardware is to test it out in what's called a virtual machine. Basically, what a virtual machine does is that it practically pretends to be hardware that lets you install an OS to it. So, it's difficult to explain in words, but I'll show you what I mean. We're going to be downloading VirtualBox, right? So just search up VirtualBox. Find like the first link. It should be www.virtualbox.org right here, right? And what you want to do is that you want to go to the download page and select a Windows host. After we download VirtualBox here, right? You might get an error when you try to install it, especially if you've done like a deployed install of Windows. So if you run into an error, make sure you download Microsoft Visual C++. So you go here and this link here, and you download the package. Once you have downloaded the package, you can install it, and here you see I already have it installed. After you have Microsoft Visual C++ installed, you want to execute VirtualBox, and you'll be presented with an installation menu. So and start the installation. So it's gonna take a minute. I might speed things up. Oh, that was actually quite fast. So once it's done installing, you need to reboot your system, right? So you just hit the restart button here. It should reboot. And once your system reboots, it should have all the kernel modules loaded for VirtualBox. Now you can just open up VirtualBox and hopefully work. And you see here I already have a virtual machine created. I'm going to show you how to do that real quick. Let me remove it. So what you want to do first is you need to click this button here that says new. So you can create a new virtual machine. You need to give it a name. So let's call it my second virtual machine. And next what you want to do is that you need to select an ISO image to use, right? So you click here other, and you'll be able to look through your files and browse through them for ISOs. And here I have a Bazite, which is what we're going to be testing out. So let me select that real quick. And this is real important. Make sure you press this button here that says skip unintended installation. And for the hardware we want to at least like 2 CPUs. Yeah, that's good. And just let it create a disk image. Press finish, and we have our virtual machine. And now you can just launch the hold up. Alright, I'm back. I had a little bit of an issue with the installer. Here we now have the virtual machine working. So after you set up the virtual machine, you can press start here, right? And it should just boot right up. So here now we're in the grub menu, and if you want to like exit out of it, you can press C and type in halt. And what we could do is that now we can just like go through the installation process. Now we're in Bazite, and you can see here the performance is actually quite poor because we only gave it like 2 CPU cores, so things are a little bit slower. But you can now test out Bazite inside a virtual environment first, so that way you can figure out if you want to install this on your actual hardware. So just take a moment to play around with it, open up Steam, maybe go through the different apps. So right now, if you try to play games in a virtual machine, like the performance will be absolutely horrible because VirtualBox uses what's called para-virtualization, and it also tries to virtualize like the GPU a bit, but the virtualized GPU isn't that great, so you might not be able to run games well. But once you install on our hardware, I can guarantee that it'll be probably up to par with your system. If you install it on hardware, it will run better. So as you can see here, it's like absolutely falling apart on me. Now the process to install Linux on hardware is it's a little bit more involved than installing within a virtual machine. So we'll get right into that. What you first have to do is download this program called Rufus. You want to go to this site here, rufus.ie, and it'll have some downloads here. Just download the top one here. Then you'll want to find a spare USB thumb drive around 8 to 16 gigabytes or more, which you'll use to flash the ISO to. Make sure you back up any data on the thumb drive first, because Rufus will erase all the data on the drive. We're gonna launch Rufus. We select the USB that we want to use, and we select our ISO here, disk image, open it up, and unless you're using a really old crap top, like old system, you'd go with MBR. But in this example, we're gonna go with GPT. If we're on a modern UEFI system, UEFI is like a standard that succeeds BIOS, but everybody calls it a BIOS because, like, what else are we gonna call it? And you can set the volume label if you want, but just like leave it. We just press start. It's going to destroy all the data on the USB thing we plugged in. So it's here, right here. I've already done it, but I'm going to do it again just to show you guys. It's going to delete some partitions. So once it's done, it'll show this screen here. So you can just close out of it, and we're done. So once you have your ISO flashed to your thumb drive, right, and you eject it properly, so that way you don't have like any data corruption. We don't want that. You'll want to look for a user guide or manual of your laptop or motherboard if you're on a desktop. And why we want to do that is that we want to know what button we need to press in order to get into the BIOS menu. Because that's a really important step into doing this right? Because if we can't get into like our boot menu, that means you can't boot. So I'm gonna show you. For example, I'm on an Asus laptop here, right? Yeah, I'm on Asus TUF Gaming. So what I do is that I copy pasted this, throw it into a search engine. Here I have user's guide for my laptop, and we want to go to manual and documents. Look for user's guide, right? And not every website is going to be like this for like, your specific hardware, but I'm just showing an example for Asus. We'll look for a user's guide in your language, right? We'll look for BIOS. Here, in order to get into the BIOS menu, right, you press F2. Now I'm just showing you this as an example of what I have to press on my laptop in order to get into the BIOS menu. On different hardware, the key combinations to get in is always going to be different. So don't expect F2 to work on your laptop or your computer. So do a little bit of research, press the function keys one by one, or look online. Okay, so once you're in the BIOS menu, what you want to do is disable Secureboot, because by default most Linux distributions might not be signed by default, which means that they'll get blocked by Secureboot. There are distributions that are signed for Secureboot by default, but I generally just disable it just so things work. You'll see here in a moment on Bezite, their distribution is signed by default, so you can just disable it temporarily and enable it later. After you disable Secureboot, you want to switch over to boot override or boot menu if your BIOS has it. I mean, if your BIOS doesn't have an option to boot from a USB, It's probably because it has a separate boot menu built in, which requires like a different keybind, which you can still easily look up. Now, some hardware might not come with a keybind to get into the BIOS or boot menu. So, for example, this Lenovo laptop here has what's called a Novo button built into the side of the panel, which you have to use a paper clip to insert into a small hole in order to press the button, which will bring you to this menu, which lets you choose between going into the BIOS menu or the boot menu. So once you boot, usually you'll be presented with a menu which will guide you through the installation process of your system. Now, not every Linux distribution comes with an installation menu. Like for example, Arch Linux will be thrown straight into the terminal, where you have to either use like Arch install, which is a command you execute, or you can install it manually. I'm not going to guide you through manual installation of Linux via the command line, because this video guide is more geared towards beginner Linux distributions. Now, in the installation menu, you'll usually be prompted to create a user with a complicated password, and you'll also be option to manually partition your system, which means you can change the file system and layout of the drive you're installing your system to. Usually it's best to go with automatic partitioning, which will wipe the drive you choose to install to and do everything automatically for you. Now, you can always do manual partitioning, but that's a bit of a pain if you don't know how to do that. Now, what I highly recommend you do is that if you don't have a Ethernet cable plugged in, you should definitely set up a Wi-Fi network and connect to it. Not all Linux distributions put all their packages onto like the ISO, so they might need internet to download extra resources for the system to be installed properly. So definitely configure that. And another important thing to consider, if you have an option to set the time and date, you definitely need to do that, because most desktop Linux distributions use this thing called an NTP client, which is a network time protocol, which syncs your system time to the time of the rest of the world. And why that's important is that if you don't set your system time correctly, then you might not be able to connect to the internet, because SSL certificates might appear to be expired on your system. If you've made it this far, then congrats, because you now know the bare minimum to get Linux working. Though keep in mind, not all Linux distributions are made equal. Depending on what hardware you choose to install to, there's a high likelihood you'll encounter issues. The best way to resolve any errors or problems is simply to look it up. To get good results, it's best to look at any forum posts, pages, or anything related to your specific distro. A good source of information to look at is the Arch Linux Wiki, which has pages upon pages of very useful information that could help you on practically any distro, regardless of what it's based on. And if you're brave enough, you can always ask people online